বাংলাদেশী আৰু নেপালী বিদেশীয়ে অসমত অনুপ্ৰৱেশ কৰি সৃষ্টি কৰা সমস্যাৰ বিষয়ে আন্তৰ্জাতিক মঞ্চত উত্থাপন আৰু সহযোগিতাৰ আহ্বান। যোৱা 23 আগষ্ট তাৰিখে মালয়েছিয়াৰ ৰাজধানী মানিলাৰ পৰা এছিয়া ইণ্ডিজিনিয়াছ পিপুলছ পেক্টৰ পৃষ্ঠপোষকতাত এছিয়া ইণ্ডিজিনিয়াছ ইউথ প্লেটফৰ্ম আৰু ইণ্ডিজিনিয়াছ মুভমেণ্ট অৱ কেথলিক ষ্টুডেণ্টছৰ উদ্যোগত ভাৰতীয় সময় বিয়লি 4:30 পৰা 6:10 অনুষ্ঠিত হৈছিল আন্তঃৰাষ্ট্ৰীয় ৱেবিনাৰ। বিশ্ব খিলঞ্জীয়া দিৱস উপলক্ষে আয়োজন কৰা এই ৱেবিনাৰত কেনেকৈ খিলঞ্জীয়া মহিলা আৰু পুৰুষে সীমিতকৰণৰ বহুমুখী দিশবোৰ অতিক্ৰম কৰিব এই বিষয়ত আলোচনা হৈছিল। ইণ্ডিজিনিয়াছ মুভমেণ্ট অৱ কেথলিক ষ্টুডেণ্টছৰ সমন্বয়ক উইলিয়াম নকৰেকে উদ্বোধনী ভাষণ দিছিল। আদৰণি ভাষণ দিছিল এছিয়া ইণ্ডিজিনিয়াছ পিপুলছ প্লেটফৰ্মৰ সদস্যা চন্দ্ৰা ত্ৰিপুৰাই। খিলঞ্জীয়া মুভমেণ্টৰ ঐতিহাসিক দিশ, ইয়াৰ বাধা আৰু প্ৰত্যাহ্বান সম্পৰ্কে ব্যাখ্যা দাঙি ধৰিছিল মালয়েছিয়া চৰকাৰৰ সাংসদ তথা এছিয়া ইণ্ডিজিনিয়াছ পিপুলছ পেক্টৰ প্ৰাক্তন মহাসচিব শ্ৰীমতী জেন্নী লাচিম্বামে। খিলঞ্জীয়া মুভমেণ্টৰ বাধা আৰু প্ৰত্যাহ্বান সম্পৰ্কে ব্যাখ্যা কৰে এছিয়া ইণ্ডিজিনিয়াছ পিপুলছ পেক্টৰ মহাসচিব গামে চিমৰেই। খিলঞ্জীয়া নতুন পুৰুষক উদ্দেশ্যি আৰু খিলঞ্জীয়া সংগ্ৰামত অংশগ্ৰহণ কৰিবলৈ আহ্বান জনাই ভাষণ দিয়ে এছিয়া ইণ্ডিজিনিয়াছ পিপুলছ পেক্টৰ প্ৰাক্তন মহাসচিব জোৱান কাৰ্লিঙে। ইউনেস্কোৰ ভৱিষ্যত পৰিকল্পনা সম্পৰ্কে ব্যাখ্যা দাঙি ধৰে ইউনেস্কোৰ এছিয়া আঞ্চলিকৰ উপদেষ্টা শ্ৰীমতী VJ সুচানে। মালয়েছিয়া, থাইলেণ্ড, ইণ্ডোনেছিয়া, বাংলাদেশ, নেপাল আদি পৃথিৱীৰ বিভিন্ন দেশৰ ৭৫গৰাকী বিশিষ্ট ব্যক্তিয়ে অংশগ্ৰহণ কৰা এই ৱেবিনাৰত একমাত্ৰ অসম সন্মিলিত মহাসংঘৰ কাৰ্যকৰী সভাপতি মতিউৰ ৰহমানে অসমৰ খিলঞ্জীয়াৰ বাধা আৰু প্ৰত্যাহ্বান সম্পৰ্কে বক্তব্য দাঙি ধৰি বাংলাদেশ আৰু নেপালৰ পৰা হৈ থকা বিদেশী প্ৰৱেশ আৰু আগ্ৰাসনৰ কথা উত্থাপন কৰি সমস্যা সমাধানৰ বাবে আন্তঃৰাষ্ট্ৰীয় সহযোগিতা বিচাৰে। বিষয়টো গুৰুত্বপূৰ্ণ বুলি উপলব্ধি কৰি এই বিষয়ত কাৰ্যকৰী ব্যৱস্থা লোৱাৰ সম্পৰ্কত আলোচনাৰ প্ৰয়োজন আছে বুলি কয়। আলোচনাত উত্তৰ পূব খিলঞ্জীয়া পৰিষদৰ আহ্বায়ক ডাক্তৰ হেমন্ত গগৈও অংশগ্ৰহণ কৰিছিল। ব্যুৰ' ৰিপৰ্ট, পাটকাই টিভি।
Secretary General of Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, who always, who have been a mentor for me in my life and always showering love to all the indigenous youths, in our way. And also we will have Juan Perling, who is another inspiration for all the indigenous youths, who is, we always claim that these three people are the power bank for all indigenous communities, particularly for indigenous youths again. And we will have our friend who is not indigenous but who never let us, she is not among us, Ms. Shu Vers from UNESCO. We are really grateful, to them for joining us today. And this initiative, I would say that is really amazing for all indigenous youths. Although IMCS has initiated this for their network members, for their Christian indigenous youths, and they have recently launched the indigenous youth platform, a commission for the Christian indigenous youth. But I strongly believe that this will not just a platform for the indigenous youths who are Christians, but for all the indigenous youths around the world. Today we will be having an amazing discussion by four of most inspirational goals in our lives on indigenous women and men overcoming multiple dimension of marginalization. We clearly know that indigenous peoples face the most they experience throughout their lives all kind of marginalization, be it due to geographical location, be it due to gender and their sexual orientation and their age, and this kind of marginalization actually impacts in the individual's life physically, psychologically and emotionally. So we will be listening to them, and we'll try to learn a lot. And for all the indigenous youths, particularly who have attended this webinar, and this is actually second phase of the initiative the IMCS has organized in collaboration with the Asia Indigenous Youth Platform. And for today's webinar, the Bangladesh Indigenous Youth Forum is also another co-host. And I believe that indigenous youths will be able to learn a lot today through these webinars. Interventions of from Jani, from Joan and Gam, as well as from Sue's interventions. And this is another, we always, our elders always complain, they actually sometimes complain that indigenous youths, not just indigenous youths, actually young people, they, in this era, they are actually more dependent on the Wikipedia or Google than the elders, where actually our elders or our ancestors, they used to talk a lot with the elders. So I think this is an amazing opportunity for all of us to, have more interactive sessions, and not just we will not just make this today's webinar just listening from them, but we'll also ask different questions on the specific agenda that we have today. I'm not gonna extend this much, but I will expect that our participants, all the delegates, will have the opportunity to also interact with our speakers today, and we'll be able to learn a lot from them. And I thank IMCS again for this, for making this bridge for all indigenous youths, as well as organizing this intergenerational dialogue today. Thank you so much. Over to you, William.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Chandra, for your welcome mark. So it's really inspiring. Thank you so much. Yeah. Now I would like to invite Ms. Jenny Lasimbang, MLA, Sabah, Malaysia, and she is a former Secretary General of AIPP and former member of IMRIP, to share with us her historical background of becoming a global women leader for indigenous movement by overcoming various obstacles and challenges. Yeah, and she will share with us the importance of participation in national politics for indigenous peoples. Welcome, ma'am. Yeah, it's over to you. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this invitation, the Indigenous Youth Platform, Indigenous movement of the IMCS, and also the Bangladesh Indigenous Youth Forum. I'm very pleased to be able to join this, and I do hope that we are able to share a little bit about what the topic is. So briefly, Kopi Posian, greetings to everyone, to all the participants here. I understand many are youths, but also students from various countries. For me personally, I mean, I didn't know what exactly need to be shared, but I thought, the experience we have. Of course, for us, we started when it was early in the 80s. For me, going from my personal experience as a woman, also an indigenous woman activist, I think there are very few women even today who are still very active in going to communities, going to internationally. There's been a lot of increase of people working now in the social in NGO field, but just I think starting from where I am in Sabah, I think one of the key things that I found was the opportunity. If you are an indigenous woman activist, there's a lot of opportunity to actually represent, in my case, Malaysia, to meetings, and that's the start. We went to many communities in Asia, as well as conferences, UN conferences, and all over the world. For me personally, I love attending the biodiversity conference because it allowed me to visit different countries, and I think being involved in Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, or AIPP, allowed me to stay with communities, and I think these are the things that ground us. Being where we are will ground us into issues that will make us to help us when we go internationally, learning things and also understanding people. And so this is my sharing for youths who are young and who wants to be involved. I think my involvement in Pakos Trust, a community-based organization in Sabah, is important. The grounding, before we go to any of the international meetings to talk about indigenous rights, we need to understand what is happening at our own level. So often I remember growing up being ashamed of who I am as an indigenous person, but actually those understanding those are very important grounding for us. So whenever I go to the UN or even a regional conference, I do not have a problem finding ideas to share and talk about. So I think for young people, those are the things that may be interesting for you. Language, of course, is often when you go internationally, language is a problem. But for us who studied, of course, English young, it was easier. But maybe now for many it is difficult, no? But there are always interpretation. You can find friends or organizations to help you. And I will always say the universal sign language of the heart to communicate is the best. So you will be able to overcome those challenges. Actually, I grew up being quite shy, and I find that you have to work very hard. I had to work very hard to be an effective representative, especially as time goes on and you are tasked with bigger responsibilities. Like being a key negotiator. I remember AIPP, the Asia Indigenous Peoples, recommended me to be a negotiator for the outcome document of the UN World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. I mean, it's huge. You have to be in in New York, so to be able to overcome, to be able to talk. To be an effective representative, talking to governments, talking to indigenous peoples all over the world is so important to be able to do that. And I think in the beginning it will be difficult, but nothing can be too difficult to not a big challenge if we find commonalities and issues with indigenous peoples and you are willing to work together. It becomes very interesting. I found that this is usually how it is. A lot of people, a lot of indigenous people all over the world, when they gather, they are willing to come in and share. Of course, it also means you will to synthesize ideas and demands into a small document is difficult. So you, as a person, we grow to share, to be able to listen to others, and the backgrounds and their key issues, what are their positions, what are the actions that they want to take, and put that into a statement or a plan of action during these international meetings. And I can tell you that many indigenous leaders can be very vocal, very insistent, and may not be willing to compromise. it could also be complicated by, even as an indigenous woman representative, I find also resistance from other male indigenous leaders. And if you go to a mix like indigenous and non-indigenous meetings, you actually have to, you might find that indigenous issues are really really put aside, and it's one of the issues that are treated very not very important to many countries, or seen as the most controversial issue. Indigenous people's issues are considered very controversial, especially when it comes to land, territories, and resources. It is considered very conflicting. And I remember, for example, going to Taiwan, and then we were trying to work out, and there are so many issues that they want to take out on human rights. But when it comes to indigenous issues, everybody is, all the government as well as even the experts will tend to put down indigenous issues. Okay, going back to personal experience again. Actually, I started getting involved in indigenous issues in 1984 when I was just 21 years old. And during our university days, I was involved in the Christian Union. But, that time it was more focused on religious or, issues. And at that time, so to me, it's good. It's great to start when we are young. And I hope as young people, you can be inspired to join indigenous movements. I find it now, when I'm almost 60 years old, traveling, long distance travel and walking, it's not very convenient. No? It's very tough. Those days easy, 5-10 hours flight is easy, but that's why when you're young and you're fit and there's more time for you, maybe no families to the responsibilities. So go. My advice is to go now when you're young. My most wonderful memories are with, for example, the semi-nomadic penans in Sarawak, in Malaysia, doing community work with the Muruts in Sabah. So my community work in remote areas for 17 years helped me become more resilient, more knowledgeable on indigenous issues, and really to distinguish between what is right, what and what we should bring or demand at the international level. So basically, I think that's what I have when it comes to the international level. In terms of the second question about participation of youth in national politics for indigenous peoples, when we talk about politics, often people think about party politics, and we often get mixed response. Many young people are quite fed up of corrupt and ineffective governments, and it's very easy to target, to get angry with politicians in general. We may not be or just lose faith in politics or involvement in national politics. Other young people may think, wow, being a politician is great. That would be an opportunity to be there in power. Others think that that's where your source of money would be. But to me, participation in politics is very important. It's not just to oppose government and politician in power, because this is not everyone's cup of tea, and there are very few who wants to be involved. There are more to national politics than exposing corrupt politicians and government. It's actually a process of changing our political systems to fight for a better future, especially for indigenous people. So for indigenous youths, I hope that will be your you will be inspired to change, to want to change the system. Many people now, going through our political upheaval just these last few days in Malaysia has been, like a lot of people say, oh, forget it, no? But for indigenous peoples in particular, I think it's so important for us to change system and earn respect for who we are as indigenous peoples. For so long, we have faced discrimination, we face marginalization at the social, economic, cultural, and political level. Our way of life as indigenous peoples, our lands, territories, and resources are not respected by governments and the dominant society too. So we struggle to also. So as elders and people who have gone through this struggle for a long time, we want to transmit. We want to transmit our culture. We want to transmit our traditional knowledge to the next generation. But we are constantly battling in our own community, in ourselves, because there are so many outside influences, and we debate the relevance of our culture, our traditional systems in the modern world. So that's why, for me, it is for young people. We are getting old, so like to be involved in national politics, to change the policies of that we have now, the corrupt systems in towards indigenous peoples. My experience, for example, of how long the changing of policies. One particular example I have is the marriage, fixing the marriageable age to 18 years old, because as indigenous peoples in Sabah, and I think in many countries in the world, there is no particular age of marriage. So here, with the age at the UN fixing it at 18, below that is a child, considered a child. So my experience here in trying to change the law has not been easy, but once I was in government, we were able to bring together the UN agencies, NGOs, government together, and they were able to analyze whether 18 is an age that we should fix and make it into a law. It's not so easy. We find that we have to go through cabinet, we have to go through the government, and then to the National Assembly to try and change that. We met with a lot of resistance and challenges, even by indigenous peoples themselves. So to do that is it took us quite a long time, and we have to put it in law. So everything has to be done. So if the young people, I find it very happy to see the Girl Guides, in the schools. They came out. They had songs. They had posters, and many more to help in this campaign. And I was very touched that they were able to do that. Often we cannot, as politicians, we cannot go to the school, or just maybe an NGO cannot go to the school because it's so strict. But the Girl Guides are already in the schools, so they were willing to talk about this, and I think that created the change in society, and managed to convince people in general that it is that the law. It's important for the law to be fixed, to have this age limit. There are many more. I was involved in, for example, in one of the Human Rights Commission doing the investigation, on land, dispossession of land of indigenous peoples, and it was used. We have not been. It was not so successful, but it's something that we continue to work on. So we can have more pro-indigenous peoples policies on land, and we can use international instruments. For example, we use the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the ILO 169 and many others on the rights to development that can be used so that free, prior informed consent, and many of these principles that are already adopted in international law can be brought at home. So once again, I just want to stress that young people, youths have a role to play because they're very proficient in the social media, especially, and so it's very easy to communicate. It's very easy to give information. It can travel faster, and it can be you have a lot more learnings from other countries that we can rely on. So I don't know whether I think I stop there for now. Thank you, William, for this time, and also for everyone else for this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
A lot of indigenous people, when together, they are willing to come in and share. It helps to synthesize ideas and demands. So as a person, we grow to be able to listen to others, plans, actions, statements of others. Thank you, Ma'am, for your nice sharing with us. So I hope our youth are very inspired after listening to you. So welcome to Ma'am Joan Carling. You are with us. Welcome with us. Now I would like to invite Mr. Gam Shibure, Secretary General of Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, to share with us his historical background of becoming a global leader for the indigenous movement by overcoming various obstacles and challenges, and provide a future picture of indigenous peoples. Welcome, sir. Now it's over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening to all of you, and thank you very much, William. It was indeed quite a refresher and a pleasure to hear Jenny sharing her experiences. And first, before I go ahead, I just want to apologize that I won't be able to stay for the whole program. But you are in good hands of many people, so apologies for that. But yes, while thinking about what to share here and the questions that you have put, I thought, yes, I will try to reflect myself when I was a youth, and in my youth life, perhaps what kind of questions and what kind of experiences changed me. You are talking about inspiration and leadership and so on, and perhaps my experience, if at all, could also be something that you might find it relevant. At the beginning, I just want to say that in the IBP itself, there has been quite a few leaders and also from the communities and also as AIPP that have had a lot of impact on me. For example, I know I also worked very closely with Jenny. She is somebody I've always looked up and being very wise when it comes to practical matters and practical actions. And that's how I learned a lot from her as well. And also the Louis, the first SecGen, he was, for example, very good in deep inquiry into issues and, helping people to navigate oneself into deeper questions, therefore deeper self-realization. That also was very inspirational. And I also work with Joanne, who is here with us. She is a strong leader who is very keen and always very determined in terms of taking very bold steps and so on. So all these are combinations, of course, that always shape somebody. And I'm just saying as an example that there are many ways when we look at leadership. And all these are experiences with whom I work very closely in some way or the other have also influenced me. Now, to begin with, I just want to go back a little bit to my youth life, the context under which I was brought up. of course, it was a situation where I was born and brought up in a very intense conflict situation, military conflict, just like in Bangladesh, that most of you also must be facing the same. Now, in that, what we see is, of course, full of destruction. Destruction in terms of life, property, your institutions, customary institutions, and so on. Everything upon which we depend our life on is being destroyed in front of your eyes. And therefore, kind of a chaos, kind of very gloomy kind of experience just descends over you. And that's not very easy to overcome that kind of challenges. Eventually, you begin to question yourself. I have lost a lot of my very, very close families and relatives. People have died and so on. I didn't grow up watching cartoons and so on like a normal kid, which you also must be experiencing. So all these have very, very deep, profound impacts on all of us. And it's not so easy, our journey. Now, but fortunately for me, and this is a place where sometime out of 365 days in a year, almost 300 days are closed and schools don't operate and so on. So where do you learn? Your institutions are destroyed. And even in the government institutions, it hardly functions. So where do you go? No? I was therefore sent in a boarding school. Fortunately, I got a scholarship. That time it was called the Northeastern Council. But that scholarship was for military school. So the irony is that I went to a school where it is precisely that same institutions that is destroying our life back home. It was an irony, but I nevertheless went there. Education that I got there, as you know, is everything to do with to cut me off from my roots, from my identity, to take away all those kind of things that is supposed to have shaped my self, my identity. So it was kind of a huge conflicting situation. Nevertheless, every year I would be going back to my village. And I still remember at the age of 6, 7, 8, I still remember already participating in community activities, whether it's festival or any kind of programs. And me as a youth, boys and girls, we had our own role. We were all very active as the youth in the village, and we have different age groups within the youth itself, and we were within that youngest group. And I remember elders coming, with mix of humor, mix of seriousness, just to check on, without much interference, how we are planning and if there is possibility for any advice. So we would normally go gathering water or firewoods. And if our plan is in a deep jungle and may not be safe or may not be the right place, they will say, oh, maybe you better go there. There are firewoods available and, it will be easier and so on. So we would go like that and we would participate in the community activities. This is just an example in various forms. Somehow my participation in the community life had a very deep imprint in me as well. So my education and experience in the community was always conflicting, meaning that I began to wonder, should things be like this? Are we really so such savages that we need to be civilized? We need to be tamed in such violent manner? These kind of questions were always something that kept hovering in my mind. Then in my university days, of course, I came across many things and I knew that something is wrong. I did not accept that. And therefore something must change was something that I realized. But then what must change and how should things change is also again a big question. Then I came across a story in Africa. It's also about oppression, suppression, and so on. This is a very short story. So it's a story which goes something like a community, nomadic community was traveling in a caravan. When they were traveling, some bandits or gangsters overtook them. And the gangsters took this caravan in the direction that they want. So they deviated from the original route in which this community was traveling. After a period of time, as time went by, the community discussed and they also felt that things must change. And they staged a kind of a revolt. And they were finally able to overpower these gangsters. And finally, they took control of it. After they took control of it, they realized that they don't know where they were because they have deviated the direction in which the community was going. Things were no longer the same. So some in the community argued that we have to continue as we are going because we have lost our direction. And some says, no, this is not where we were going. This is not our worldview. This is not our vision. So some argue that we must go back to the place from where this deviation took place. And some argue that no, time has passed, things have changed. Why should we go back at that time? We cannot go back in time. This was a sort of argument of this story. That story kind of really struck me and inspired me to think in a much more deeper way. And in many ways, therefore, I realized also that without going back, at least in my imagination, and recovering something of what really is my roots, my identity, what is the meaning of my participation that I recall when I was young and continue to still participate. What does all those things mean? Can I still recover something that will shape and take me in the direction that I want or my people want? This is the kind of question. This led me to a lot of course, learnings in the process. Now, this learning began really when I began to accept that things have to change. I have to believe that things must change. And it cannot change, I think, if we don't believe that things can change, even if we know what the problem is, right? So I also learned that failure, as the old saying goes, that failure is the pillar of success. I think this is a universal axiom that stands to be true in our life. So what this means is that failure means it's not about a destructive action. But perhaps for most of us, the experience is when we fail, we learn what is really deep and effective learning happens in many of our life. But what this failure means is that we learn from it so it leads to an effective learning. It means it is a realization of something meaningful and internalizing the new meaning that gives us and shapes us into something different and makes us move forward. Now, this means that we must learn to effectively fail, not just fail for the sake of failing and we keep destroying things, no? But determined and in search of solutions that we're looking for. And if that is clear, I think we aim high. We are clear with our goals. And then in that process, we will learn from our failures. And those learning becomes very effective and deep and shapes us something like a new person. And in this also what I learned is that, yes, I have many idols, many people who inspired me. I try to imitate my parents. I try to imitate many of these leaders or people that have inspired me. But that is just an imitation. It is, more importantly, is I have to shape myself. I must become who I am. So my identity as an individual is also different. So I stopped comparing myself to others. I'm inspired by many people, but I do not compare myself with others. I compare myself to myself. What this means is that each day I try to reflect if I have moved a step forward, if I have done things better today than yesterday. Am I better today than how I was yesterday? These kind of questions. And this is accessible to everyone. So that gives you the satisfaction and the motivation to move forward. If you compare yourself with a rich person or a successful person, and you cannot become that person, it only leads to jealousy. It only leads to self-degeneration. That is something I think is a very important turning point as far as I am concerned. Now, lastly, I just want to speak about leadership. I think this is how day by day we become a leader. Leaders are not made in a day, right? But what is important is that leadership should not become indispensable. Leadership should play its role, but it should not be indispensable, for example, in any organization or for any country for that matter. Otherwise, what happens is it becomes like the dictators. Dictators will keep saying that, okay, if I remove and give the leadership to others, it will collapse, there will be chaos, there will be bloodshed, and then it continues. And we have seen also in many a times where in some organization, one leader is there for a lifetime. We have seen that. What I mean to say is that if we have to look at it this way, that leadership should not be indispensable, it means that we must build leadership. We must diversify leadership. There has to be distributed leadership. So for example, the reason why do we build youth platforms is because so that leadership platforms are provided for the youth to play the leadership role and to groom itself through self-learning and from learning from many other things like Jenny has explained. So that is the kind of platform, for example, we build and we need to build for the women, for the youth, and for others, so that leadership is diversified, leadership is distributed, this kind of things. But one important thing that we should ask is, what constitutes indigenous leadership? Where does it draw its legitimacy, right? And the question we should also be asking is, do our indigenous leadership permeates and is practiced in our organizations? Or are we just romanticizing, and is it just a rhetoric, and is it really being truly applied? Because application is the challenge, and that is where we need to have that wisdom and the know-how of how we do it. And that are the points that we must reflect any platform, any leadership that we create, you know, to make it meaningful. Yes. And we must question whether this leadership is advancing, supporting, energizing the network, the organizations. Is it fulfilling the goals, the vision of indigenous struggle, objective, and so on? Then we must also be, I think one important thing that we need to be asking today in Asia is we seem to be losing a lot of this leadership of where the collective power, the power to make collective decisions about our future, about our community, and of our plannings. That collective decision-making power is, I think, one of the main challenges that I see today, where we must constantly be reflecting and be trying to address. Now, why I raise this is because our struggle is not just about our struggle to take control. Our right to self-determination is just not about taking control of our land, territories, and resources. Just like I was giving you the example of the story of the caravan. We will face this, how do we move forward after we take control, right? So our struggle leadership was what we need to reflect is that It's also about remaking our future in our own designs. But what is this designs that we are trying to create is something that we must be pondering and working on now. Not only at the time when we take control of things and be faced with that kind of a monumental challenge of a chaotic situation. So our struggle is about uncovering, recovering, and reclaiming indigenous sovereignty. And that means it is about our worldviews, our values, and principles that makes us indigenous. Yes, because we are the sovereign over this and no one else. That values and principles, what we keep talking about, whether it's in environment or governance, about reciprocity, about sharing, about caring for nature, a community, being in community with our environment, all these kinds of values, the reciprocity, all these things, reconciliation. These are something that we possess. These are something that we can reclaim. And these are the ones that we are sovereign over. So it is a struggle to really reclaim, recover these things and reclaim. Now, with the last point that I want to end is that in the indigenous values and principles, the sovereign that we have to emphasize, to me, it's really what is important is love. Now, I'm not saying this in a romantic sense. No, we all long for something, and very deep, of course, and we feel very strongly. Well, you might say that, okay, I found my girlfriend or boyfriend, and then this is the person or something that I want to give everything for. And then 1 year later, you might realize that it is the disaster of your life. It was a wrong choice, decision, whatever. But the point is that the love for my community, the love of my participation in the way that things were done when I was young and that shaped me, that is what constitutes my roots. And that is the passion, the motivation, the love of my identity, the roots and my participation in the community and how community work together and shape one another. This is the love that I'm talking about. Do you have the love to be sharing something with another person? Do you have the love for that person that you are able to sacrifice? Because there is a demand for sacrifice in our struggle. That is where indigenous peoples always emphasize reconciliation. Reconciliation is about working towards the future because it's talking about forgiveness. And it is not possible without this kind of values and principles that we kind of uphold and embody. So to me, it is this the love for our community life, our rootedness, and how we work together and share everything. That is something I must say that really shaped me and continues to motivate me in everything that I do. I will end here. Thank you, William. I do hope that it does. I hope there is some sense for, at least to some extent, for all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, that the leaders are not met in a day, but what is important is leadership should play its role, but should not be essential. Application is the challenge. That is the action of wisdom. We must learn how to questions. Is leadership effective enough? Thank you, sir. Thank you for your nice sharing and speech with us. I hope our young people, they are happy to hear you here. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you again. So now I would like to invite Mrs. Joan Carling, co-convener Indigenous Peoples Major Group for the SDGs, former General Secretary, Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, and a former member, the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, to share with us her historical background of becoming a global women leader for the indigenous movement by overcoming various obstacles and challenges, and the importance of participation in decision making and policy making process of national and intergovernmental agencies. Welcome, Mom. Floor is yours. Now it's over to you.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to hear from Jenny and Gam. We are all together in the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, and I'm also happy to see all this is young in Indigenous. It's also encouraging for us, the older generation, to know that the Indigenous youth are stepping up, and I hope many of you will be engaged in the long term in relation to advancing the Indigenous peoples movement in the region, in Asia, but also at the global level. Now, with regards to my historical background, I started as an activist, and I actually started as a student activist, which probably many of you are, and I hope you are in your stage now. But as a student activist, I learned particularly about the struggle of indigenous peoples against the dams. That was the Chico Dam at that time. And so it was a successful struggle because they were able to stop this project that was funded by the World Bank. But it has encouraged me to see the communities that have spearheaded this struggle. So I went there during the summer break as a student to see to join what was then known as the Macleing Memorial. It was the memorial for the leader that was killed, the leader of the anti-Chico dams that was killed. No, so it was a big eye opener for me to really see the situation of tribal communities in the province, but also it has it inspired me to see the strength and resoluteness of them to give up their life to protect their land and their dignity. And that was really that was a turning point. Many people think that the indigenous communities are poor. They are very, they are not happy, or that they need help. But in this situation, they don't. They were happy in their daily life. It was simple life, but they feel they have the dignity because they were in control of their life. They govern themselves, and they work hard for something to feed, not to feed their families, and they're able to do their rituals. They're able to celebrate. And so when the dam project came in, that was really a serious threat to them, right? So they really, women, youth, elders came together and they really worked in unity to protect their land with their life, and they won. And that was a big eye-opener also to the World Bank. In fact, that was the reason why the World Bank developed their indigenous peoples policy. That was the context of why the World Bank developed their indigenous peoples policy, because it was clear that the project is violating the collective rights of indigenous peoples over their lands and resources. And if that is taken away, they will sacrifice their life. So having learned that and having seen that their dignity as people is not coming from material wealth, for me, that was a very important lesson. That if these people are going to sacrifice their life to uphold their dignity, their cultural integrity, the way they think, the way they regard land, the way they They regard their rivers, their rice fields. And who am I? Who am I, right? Not to be with them and not to stand by them. And as an indigenous youth at that time, that was really like, that was when it inspired me to take on these issues and start working with communities. So after college, I actually went back to the province to work with the tribal communities. And at that time, it was the height of militarization. So I was organizing fact-finding missions to areas that were bombed by the military. And it was a big eye-opener for me again, that because we went to a village, a tribal village, that were completely, they were not only bombed, but their houses were burnt to the ground. The whole village, literally. So all their artifacts, you can see their antique jars broken. So nobody was there. And when we reached the area, that's when they from the forest came out to meet the team, the fact-finding team. And they were desperate. They were desperate to harvest their vegetables and fruits, but they were forbidden. No, so they were, and their children, some of their children were in high school, and they need to send some stipend for their children, and they don't have any source if they cannot harvest their products. So they actually begged me to talk to the military to allow them to harvest, even just for 1 or 2 days. And you know, I did not have any experience at that time, but I just have to, because the situation calls for it, right? So I really went, talked to the lieutenant at the time, the military officer, and begged that they should allow the community to harvest their crops. And it was, well, because the lieutenant was young, and then they said, from where are you? And then I was telling her, I'm from this. So he was a bit like flirting. So I had to sort of, you know, go along, just for him to allow the especially the women. It was the women begging to allow them to go and he did. Finally, he agreed. So they were really happy that they were finally able to. But these are the situation that I was dealing with. And because there were series of things like that, it was too much for me emotionally and mentally, that we decided to seek counseling, because it was the helplessness of communities, right? It's just so overbearing. The lack of justice is just so overbearing that you cannot already sleep in the night thinking about these people. So we had to undergo some counseling on how do we overcome that feeling so that we can continue to work with the communities, because some are already giving up, right? Because it was just too much. But you're in the middle of, like, the Philippine government declaring a total war against the community, the rebels who are in indigenous communities. And it was the indigenous communities suffering from all this militarization. So for me, that also honed my understanding of human rights, because that was really what was happening. No, they were arresting and putting people in jail, killing and torture and harassment and all of those. That was the situation, and it's not easy to deal with those kind of situations. Also at that time, when I was also visiting or bringing families of those in jail to visit them, in jail, and that's again another traumatic experience, because you see how families were broken because of the father being in jail, and the children growing up without their father, right? So as an activist, I mean, that really grounded me in this kind of reality. And so I continued working with mining and dams, and then it became clear that these are impositions with international connection, because the ones giving the funds for these projects are outside the Philippines. Another dam project came in, which was Roque Dam, funded by Japanese. And then a lot of mining companies were coming in from companies from the US, UK, Australia. So we then need to reach out to these countries to say, hey, you're violating the rights of indigenous peoples. You're trampling upon people who has conserved these resources, not for themselves, but for the future generations. And here you come to take it away and even leave all the waste, like mining waste, pollution, and everything. So we need to tell that story in the outside world, that they cannot allow, like the Japanese people cannot allow their government or Japanese companies to come in and violate the rights of people. That is not just discrimination, that is racism. Because how can they, exploit other people for them to become wealthy, right? That's the complete injustice. So that also brought me to the international stage, because I have to deal with them, to tell them that they are violating the rights of communities. No, that is where as you say, how I became a woman leader up to the global level. But I just want to share some important lessons before the issue on the importance of participating in decision making. I think the lesson that we should take at heart is, when we go international or even at the national and local, we have to make sure that we are grounded. We are grounded by the realities of communities in terms of how their rights are being respected or violated, but also to recognize that these people are not just vulnerable. Indigenous communities are not helpless. They are not just, communities that are wanting outsiders to come in and improve their lives. It's not like that for indigenous communities. Like I mentioned to you, they're happy exercising their, as Gam said, their right to self-determine, their own governance, their own culture, right? But at the same time, they're building their resilience. It's actually those coming from the outside that are actually dividing or weakening these systems. And that message has to be delivered at different levels, right? So when we engage at the international level, this is what we are bringing, right? It's not, not just general whatever, but really the realities on the ground and how communities are actually using their knowledge, using their cooperation to address their situation. Then also and finally, that we always combine different strategies in different levels. We cannot just have one form of strategy. We need awareness raising, we need alliance building, we need advocacy, we need to build trust, we need to build relations, we have to bring the youth, we have to bring the women, we have to bring also the voice of the persons with disabilities. We need everyone. We have to involve everyone. And we need to listen to the different perspectives. Youth have their own kind of aspirations. They are creative, and we need to listen to that. But also women have a different perspective, because they have a nurturing and caring work and knowledge. And that has to be brought in, especially in situations of conflict, right? Women are actually in the forefront of conflict transformation because they suffer the most in relation to conflicts. So we need to give value to different perspectives. but also be clear on what is the common aspiration. And we move forward with that by bringing everybody on board, because we cannot do it alone, right? So we also need to strengthen solidarity among different organizations and indigenous peoples, non-indigenous peoples, and bring that solidarity at higher levels from local, national, global, and global levels. And finally, just to conclude on the issue of participation in decision-making, the importance of this, like I said, if women are not participating in decision-making, if youth are not participating in decision-making, then that means we do not have them on board if our actions are right, and that we will not be able to account for the specific needs and aspirations and perspectives of youth and women. So the importance of participating in decision-making is that we're able to express and present our own views, especially as indigenous peoples. Like, for example, when we're dealing with the environment, right? We always carry a reciprocal relations with nature, with everything in our environment, and so if for example they want to cut down the trees, right? Because they look at the trees only with the value of timber, but when we participate in decision making and tell them, wait, that tree is not just timber. That tree provides food for animals. That tree gives water for the rice fields. So we give that perspective. We give a more holistic valuation of things, not just the commercial value where a lot of decisions are being made because one sector wants their economic interest over our resources, right? And so we need to tell them, wait a minute, the value of that resource is beyond economic terms, right? Women rely on that. The youth, the future of the youth relies on those resources. So that is the importance of participation in decision making. And so we need to find and develop and assert spaces and create the spaces where we can participate in decision making. Because if we are not on the table, then our voices will not be there. Then our perspectives will not be considered, and our aspirations will not also be taken on board. I finally, it's just to say my last words in relation to indigenous youth, that in the indigenous movement now, our future relies on you. Of that decision you make now will affect the future of indigenous peoples. And I hope you take the right decision to be part of the indigenous movement and take the leading role that is based on indigenous values of accountability, of selflessness, of building solidarity and cooperation, because these are the values that will bring us in the right direction and in a way that we can advance our vision as indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Yeah, actually, I was listening you very carefully. It's really enrichable and enlightening us. So thank you so much, ma'am, for your nice sharing and speech. Thank you. I think our another guest speaker, Mrs. Sushan, she will not join us. I think she has another emergency meeting. So yeah, all our participants, if you have questions to our three speakers, so it's floor is open now. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or you can unmute yourself and you can talk. or you can send a message in our chat also. Yeah. Thank you. So one comments from Assam, Mr. Mutiur Rahman. Yeah, Mr. Mutiur Rahman, are you here?
Yes, yes. I'm from Assam. We are day to day marginalized as because of main problem of Assam, of indigenous people, is the influx problem from neighboring country Bangladesh and Nepal. So in our Assam, rural cities, they are now out. They have been in the parliament also. So we are suffering a lot. So we urge the global community, all the indigenous groups of different countries, please help us in this regard. As because of we are fighting for our rights, and we appeal in the Supreme Court also, but court is also now silent. No final decision is yet taken. So we are in a grave danger situation. So in this situation, if our Asia organization or the other indigenous organization can help us, then we can proceed, and then we can solve the problem of influx. And we want implementation of UNDRIP also, but we appeal in the Supreme Court to instruct the government of India for implementation of UNDRIP in Assam, but it is also hanging now. So no final decision not yet taken. And for the COVID situation, the open hearing of the Supreme Court is also stopped. So we are in a great trouble. Please, in this regard, I have written different in this line. I have written clearly yesterday to the organization. So just I am appeal to all that we are the indigenous communities and the races of Assam we are in a great danger situation, and we are going to be outnumbered, marginalized. Our indigenous women and men also not represent in the assembly and the parliament. We are totally deprived our own indigenous rights, our land rights, our water rights, in every respect, in every field. We are lost. We are losing like anything. So I appeal everybody, please look into the matter and please help us in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mutiur. Yeah, Mom, would you like to respond to Mr. Mutiur?
Maybe I'll say a few words in relation to our topic today, if you allow. And I think, especially it was said, that I think many indigenous peoples everywhere in the world are experiencing this kind of marginalization, even conflict, and a very serious situation. But going back, for example, you were saying not represented politically. And this is where I think even as indigenous peoples, we have tried to, we must aspire to go there. We must try to build among ourselves political alliances, maybe leaders who can eventually go into politics. Talking about myself now. I mean, we may feel helpless and unrepresented in national parties. It doesn't matter, I think, in the beginning, whether we are aligned to any political parties, whether they're in government or opposition. But consider if young people start considering politics, being there, and joining them, also developing good leaders, for example, speakers at the community, because many of us, I find, are changed because we just need one person who give false information, use sentiments, and we go to vote for them. This is actually our golden opportunity during political, example, during elections, to put out our voice. In many countries now, of course, they now have indigenous parties. That might not be the solution for us, but we have to go there. We have to be brave enough to have young people going in, start now talking. They're community educators and communicators, so that we are not played by sentiments. We are not played by dirty politics, and then step by step we will get there. But I think start now. There are many young people here. I know the speaker is probably already older himself, but we won't get anywhere by just looking at the situation. Many of you are already involved in internationally, maybe writing to the special rapporteur or other ways to do it. But at the local level, this is my experience that we can do. And of course, there will be frustration, but we cover all levels. And I think as indigenous peoples, we will get there. We cannot lose hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am. Luckily, our guest speaker, Mrs. Shushan, is with us. So, yeah, now I would like to invite our third speaker, Mrs. Shushan, to share with us about the opportunity for indigenous youths at the United Nations level and present futures plan of UNESCO to strengthen the Asia Indigenous Youth Platform in Asia. So, yeah, floor is yours, Mrs. Shushan, and thank you, Ma'am, for your answer responding to Mr. Mathur. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we will again ask our young people to ask for questions. Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Shushan.
My apologies for being late. Yes, hello everybody. It's great to be here today. I guess I would like to just share with you a few thoughts from my perspective, working for the UN and what we've been doing with Indigenous youth. And I think firstly, there are not that many specific opportunities for Indigenous youth in the UN, and I think that's actually an issue. I think a lot of the opportunities for youth that exist are mainstreamed in that there's no specific opportunity particularly aimed at young Indigenous youth. And this is one of the reasons why we wanted to start some specific engagement with Indigenous youth to try to overcome this. I think it's very difficult for Indigenous youth to join a lot of these mainstream opportunities because they don't actually acknowledge or accept the realities for Indigenous youth. The main avenue of engagement is actually through the Indigenous Peoples Forum, which is a global level network of Indigenous people that work with the UN. And there is a thing called the major groups, and there is one for Indigenous people. It's not specific to youth. There's a similar major group specific to youth, but not for Indigenous youth. And it's quite easy, therefore, for Indigenous youth to fall into a category that doesn't really align with anything specific in the UN. And this is problematic because how do you engage if you're an Indigenous youth? It's actually not so easy. So the Asia Indigenous Youth Platform that we've been trying to set up, or we have set up in partnership with AIPP, is to try to provide an avenue for Indigenous youth to create their own space about how they want to engage. It's not just necessarily with the UN, it could be with governments, it could be with NGOs, it could be with anybody else. And the idea there is the space is specifically for Indigenous youth to think about the issues for them. What are their challenges? What are their opportunities? What are the skills and capacities they need to build to be able to engage? And then what are the key messages that they want to promote, or what is the thing that they want to take out to the world and raise awareness about, take action on, etc. So this platform goes through a series of national level groups, but we hope that it's open to all young Indigenous people to engage, to follow on Facebook, to be involved in activities, etc., as it moves forward. So we've created the space, and now we're working on building that space. So at the moment, the main area of focus is on trying to create a structure that young people can manage this space for themselves. And then in parallel to the structure and the governance, to try to create an opportunity for action. So we've had really good partnership with UNDP. UNDP has been trying to create space for young Indigenous entrepreneurs. We haven't had a lot of other engagement or traction with other UN agencies in the region yet. So, you know, we're really looking for young Indigenous people to follow this, to share their experiences, to identify the issues that they face, and to be involved in developing their own solutions that are designed by them to meet the issues that they face. And this is actually really important because Indigenous youth are the ones that know what the issues are, and they should therefore be involved in creating the responses to deal with those. So we really like to create a space that young people are leading the way. We're there to support. AIPP is there to support, but we really want young people to make the decisions, identify the issues, lead the actions to respond to those. So that's what the platform is about. And we hope that lots of young Indigenous people will join it. It is limited geographically in terms of the scope of the countries that are covered aligns with the AIPP membership. So for young Indigenous people that aren't from Southeast Asia and South Asia, I guess we should be looking at more avenues to create networks and ways for them to also be able to support their activities, participate in the mainstream, but also have their own space. And I think it's really important, that part where they have their own space. So I think I'll leave it there, and I guess I can take questions if anyone has questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, madam, for your sharing. So now, if you have any questions, please ask or raise your hand, or you can send your questions in our chat also. So, floor is open. Any questions from young people to our honorable speakers?
Maybe while they're getting up their courage or ideas for a question, I'll give one example of what the platform has been able to do so far. So we started a program of grants for the Indigenous youth last year to enable them to support their communities to respond to COVID. And this enabled around 10 Indigenous youth networks, or they didn't have to be an NGO or a specific group. They could be a group of friends or an NGO. They started their own projects, and the projects were they were quite varied depending on the countries. In Indonesia, we had a group of young people helping kids who couldn't go to school to be able to do their schoolwork. In Bangladesh, a quite different approach was one where they were actually training youth to be able to create new livelihoods to support their families during the COVID crisis. So this was one idea that the Indigenous youth came up with, of the kind of things that they need to support themselves and their communities. And they were able to conduct these projects with the support from AIPP and UNESCO. And there are some videos and various other materials, and I will share them with you, William, so that you can also extend those to the wider network.
Thank you, madam. We don't have enough time, so if you have any questions, you can ask or not. Maybe I would like to invite our guest speakers to give their final message to us. Already you shared a lot of experience with us, so please share with us your feelings or something with us, so then we will close our webinar today. Jenny Lasibang.
It's a pleasure to be part of the sharing session today, and I hope that many youths will be able to continue their involvement wherever they are. But I think it's we talk, most of us GAM have been more on the international scene, and so I think there's a lot of encouragement from us, grounding at the local level, and bringing it forward. And I think it has been really enriching for all of us. So I do hope that if you're going on that line, do continue. But also for myself now in politics, there's a lot of things also. I mean, I never thought that, we struggle a long time in the NGOs to encourage people to be involved in politics. But all the policy work that we have or advocacy that we have done, you can make a difference there. It's frustrating, politics, but you can also be there to change your. I think many of us, I really encourage young people to, on that line to even, to test it out in your own. Try being a local leader first. Go for election if there's there, and then it's a try and error in life. There's nothing hard and fast rule and all this. But the idea is not to to feel down if things are, as Gary saying, failures. Our do with energy and a lot. I continue and never give up. So we wish only to change the world for better place for Indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you for your message. Mama Joan, are you here?
Yeah. Just to be, and yeah, I echo what mentioned, and just to say that Indigenous youth have the and potentials to contribute. So trust in yourself and believe in yourself that you can contribute in advancing the rights, welfare, and vision of Indigenous peoples. So you have different options and you have different skills that you can use to be part of this movement, to be part of any platform that will serve the interest of Indigenous peoples and also strengthen your values as a part of Indigenous people. So I hope that you will live up to your identity as part of indigenous peoples and take on the leadership in the coming years. And we look forward to indigenous youth taking on the leadership and further advancing the indigenous peoples movement at all levels, from local to national to regional and at the global levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Mrs. Susan Chu.
Yeah, I guess they're great final sentiments from the other speakers. I think what I would like to urge everybody is to remember to work together, because you all have your own challenges, but you have common challenges. And when you work together, you can create, you can support each other, you can share ideas, you can share the learnings that you have from all of these activities, and you can also build a stronger voice. And I think that this is really important. And this is one of the reasons why we want young Indigenous people to come together in their own space. So I think if I were to say one thing, it would be to, you have a wealth of knowledge, you have a wealth of talents between you. And I think that if you try to bring this together and use this as a group, you can actually make so much more impact for your own communities and for Indigenous communities on a wider scale. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your message. So now I would like to thank our honorable speakers for enlightening us with your knowledge and wisdom. So today's our webinar was full of knowledge and interesting things. So it gave a deep insight into the indigenous movement in Asia and globally, also revealed some interesting facts. So also thank you to all the participants present here for paying your attention and learning. So thank you again, and thank you Asia Indigenous Youth Platform and Bangladesh Indigenous Youth Forum to co-organize with us, and overall Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, GAM, and Charu Bikash Dada and Sohel Chandra Hajong Dada and the team of AIPP, and all of my colleagues from IMCS Asia Pacific and UNESCO Asia Pacific. Thank you, ma'am. And thank you, Ma'am Joan Carling, Ma'am Jenny Lasimbang. And we launch our Insight of International Movement of Catholic Students, Insight of our movement. We launched last week. IMCS Indigenous Peoples Youth Commission. So Miss Chandra Tripura as a mentor, and Mrs. Norma M. Mapagonos, she's also with us as an elder. So we need all of your support to work for the indigenous students, since I am also indigenous young boy. So I hope we will get all of your support and cooperation in future. So thank you all, and thank you again. So let's work together and build a just world for all. Thank you all. Please take care and stay safe. Thank you. Good night. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice day. Thank you. Anggi.